Chapter 1364. Zhong Qiushui was a realistic person. To be more precise, he was a person who could recognize reality, just like what he was doing now. The Imperial Sky Pavilion had no future in his hands. In the world of great battles, it was useless even if the Imperial Sky Pavilion had a martial immortal like him. This time, the Imperial Sky Pavilion could not even defend against the combined forces of the Martial God sect and the Kiliakosm sect. How were they going to defend against stronger enemies in the future? Moreover, Zhong Qiushui knew Chu Xiu very well. Ever since Chu Xiu interfered with the Pavilion Master's battle in the Imperial Sky Pavilion, Zhong Qiushui knew what kind of person Chu Xiu was. Zhong Qiushui did not dare to say that he knew Chu Xiu very well. However, he knew that Chu Xiu was an ambitious person. The Eastern Region Alliance meeting was set to defend against external enemies, but in reality, who was the leader of the alliance? Apart from Chu Xiu, who else could it be? In that instant, Zhong Qiushui thought about many things. Perhaps joining the Kunlun Devil cult was the only way out for the Imperial Sky Pavilion now. Joining the Imperial Sky Pavilion on their own accord still owed them a favor. If they were forced to join, it would be too late. Moreover, Chu Xiu's Kunlun Devil cult did not require the vassal sects to completely give up everything they had. As long as the Imperial Sky Pavilion's inheritance was intact, he would not be considered to have let down his ancestors. Chu Xiu looked at Zhong Qiushui. He was stunned for a moment before he quickly said, "What are you doing, Pavilion Master Zhong? I'm talking about an alliance. I'm not asking everyone to join the Kunlun Devil cult." Zhong Qiushui shook his head and said, "Cult Master Chu, I've thought it through. Given the Imperial Sky Pavilion's current strength, we're no longer qualified to ally with the Kunlun Devil cult. If the Imperial Sky Pavilion can be breached once, it can be breached a second time. Instead of living in fear every day, it's better to find someone who can shoulder the Eastern region's banner. In the entire Eastern region apart from you, Cult Master Chu, who else is qualified to shoulder the responsibility?" Zhong Qiushui had always been a very serious person, but when such a serious person started to compliment others, it would be more effective. Chu Xiu did not decline. He nodded and said, "In that case, the Kunlun Devil cult welcomes Pavilion Master Zhong to join us." As he spoke, Chu Xiu turned his gaze to the people present and said in a deep voice, "Pavilion Master Zhong has joined the Kunlun Devil cult, but I don't require everyone to join as well. However, the Great Eastern Region Alliance was established for the benefit of the entire Eastern region to fight against foreign enemies, so everyone only needs to do one thing. That is to open the sect and let a portion of the Kunlun Devil cult's disciples settle in. Also, we'll set up a communication formation to facilitate communication. As for what you will gain, it is very simple. You will be safe. No matter what enemies attack from the outside, the Kunlun Devil cult will be able to rush over as soon as we receive the news. This is the first and last time the sects of the Southern Territory have raided the Eastern Territory." As soon as these words came out, everyone present wore different expressions as they discussed among themselves. At this time, Qin Baiyuan suddenly stood up and said in a deep voice, "My High Heaven sect agrees to this." Now that High Heaven sect had been destroyed, Qin Baiyuan's heart was already dead. If it were not for the fact that High Heaven sect still had a young disciple left, Qin Baiyuan might have already retired to the mountains. No matter what ambitions Chu Xiu had, at least this matter was beneficial to High Heaven sect. The current High Heaven sect was no longer the #1 sect in the Eastern Territory, so there was no other choice but to obediently submit. Of the previous two major sects of the Eastern Territory, one chose to merge with the Kunlun Devil cult while the other agreed to the alliance. Most of the sect leaders present nodded in agreement after hesitating for a moment. The Southern Territory's invasion of the Eastern Territory this time had indeed caused a great impact on them. If the Southern Territory's raid was successful, what awaited them would be a full-scale attack from the entire Southern Territory. However, there were still some cultivators who were a little reluctant. Chu Xiu had set up a communication spirit array in their sect, and even sent a disciple to guard it. What secrets would their sect have to the Kunlun Devil cult? What was the difference between that and becoming a vassal of the Kunlun Devil cult? Therefore, the cultivator who had asked before stood up again, and said after considering his tone, "Cult Master Chu, we are willing to join the Eastern Territory Alliance. After all, this is a good thing that benefits the entire Eastern Territory. But the problem is that the Kunlun Devil cult will station a disciple in our sect. Do you think we should reconsider?" Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes. He was a little surprised. He didn't expect that after the Southern Territory invaded the Eastern Territory and Royal Sky Pavilion, and High Heaven sect chose to join the Eastern Territory Alliance, there would still be people who dared to raise objections. But before Chu Xiu could speak, Zhong Qiushui suddenly said, "Cool Breeze Faction Sect Master Su. I remember that your Cool Breeze faction is within the sphere of influence of Cold River City, right? Previously, Yi Weikong tried to rope you in many times, and your two sects are very close. This time, Yi Weikong betrayed the Eastern Territory and used Cold River City as a springboard to attract the Southern Territory cultivators. Your two sects are so close, how could you not know?" Sect Master Su hurriedly said, "Pavilion Master Zhong, don't slander me. What does Yi Weikong's betrayal of the Eastern Territory have to do with me? It's not like I betrayed the Eastern Territory. No matter how close I am to him, Yi Weikong won't tell me such a thing." Zhong Qiushui said indifferently, "Slander? Now Cult Master Chu has established the Eastern Territory Alliance for the sake of the safety of the entire Eastern Territory, but you've come up with all sorts of excuses. In my opinion, you're clearly the same as Yi Weikong and have long since colluded with the Southern Territory. In this life, what I hate the most are traitors." Without waiting for Sect Master Su to speak, Zhong Qiushui directly formed seals with his hands, and the Royal Heavenly Treasure seal descended with a loud bang, sealing the space around Sect Master Su, and actually killing the seal directly. Turning his head, Zhong Qiushui cupped his hands at Chu Xiu and said, "I acted on my own accord. Please forgive me, Cult Master Chu." Zhong Qiushui's identity changed very quickly. From an ally to a subordinate, then he had to act like a subordinate. Sharing the burden of his superior was something he should do. And at this time, it was most suitable for him to play the role of the bad guy. Chu Xiu smiled faintly and said, "Pavilion Master Zhong helped the Eastern Territory to eradicate the traitors. This is a good thing. What is there to forgive?" Chu Xiu then turned his gaze to the other cultivators present, and said indifferently, "Pavilion Master Zhong's Imperial Sky Pavilion suffered a great loss because some disciples with weak wills betrayed the Eastern Territory, causing them to fight a little fiercely. Everyone, please don't take it to heart. However, what Pavilion Master Zhong said also makes sense. At this time, the Eastern Territory can no longer tolerate people being half-hearted. So does anyone have a different opinion now?" Everyone present looked at each other, stood up, cupped their hands, and said, "We're willing to listen to Cult Master Chu's arrangements." Those who had disagreed earlier did not even have a complete corpse now. How could they possibly have any objections? Chu Xiu waved his hand and said in a deep voice, "All right then. Today the Eastern Territory Alliance is officially established. We'll defend the Eastern Territory together against external enemies." Just as the people from the various sects below were about to shout their slogan, starlight shone in midair. This was a very strange scene. It was clearly daytime, but the dazzling starlight had even overshadowed the scorching sunlight. In midair, Meng Xinghe stepped on the starlight and descended. His expression was calm as he landed in the center of the Kunlun Devil Cult Square. Previously, those formations of the Kunlun Demon Sect were like nothing in front of him. In fact, they didn't even make a single sound before they dissipated completely. Seeing that Meng Xinghe had appeared here, Chu Xiu's expression did not change in the slightest. However, behind him, the expressions of Fang Baidu and Su Tianya changed slightly. Obviously, they had thought of something. They knew the relationship between Meng Xinghe and Yi Weikong. It should be said that the entire Daoyu Ocean knew about this relationship. However, they did not expect that Meng Xinghe would personally take action. However, the other people present looked at Meng Xinghe with a hint of doubt in their eyes. Who was this? Although Meng Xinghe's name was well known, he rarely appeared in the underworld, including the Eastern Territory where he was famous. Therefore, more than half of the Eastern Territory martial artists present did not know him. Chu Xiu stood up and said with a smile, Dean Meng, you've come all the way from the Northern Territory to the Eastern Territory. Are you here to participate in the Eastern Territory Alliance Convention? Chu Xiu, please forgive me for not welcoming you earlier, Dean Meng. Hearing that Chu Xiu addressed the person in front of him as Dean Meng, the people present were stunned for a moment before they realized who this person was. Who else could be addressed as Dean Meng by Chu Xiu except for Meng Xinghe, who had just established the Xinghe Martial Arts Academy. At the thought of this, the expressions of the people present suddenly became playful. Chu Xiu had killed Yi Weikong. How could Meng Xinghe come here now to participate in the Eastern Territory Alliance Convention? He probably wanted to kill Chu Xiu. Meng Xinghe stared at Chu Xiu in front of him, but there was only the Milky Way flowing in his eyes, making it difficult for people to see whether his eyes were filled with killing intent or hatred. Chu Xiu, when I invited you to join the Xinghe Martial Arts Academy at the Ancient Venerables Convention, I was sincere. Your martial Tao may seem complicated, but it's the purest martial Tao. I can't see any sectarian bias in you. In the era of great competition, luck is flowing. What you and I pursue is actually the same. At that time, I didn't have any malice toward you. As long as you can join the Xinghe Martial Arts Academy, I'm even willing to give you the position of Vice Dean. But why did you refuse? Meng Xinghe sighed and said, if you could join the Xinghe Martial Arts Academy, you would be free from the conflict between the Southern and Eastern Territory, and these things would not have happened. Yi Weikong would not have died, and I would not have deliberately come to kill you. The word kill was spat out without the slightest killing intent, but everyone present felt as if they had fallen into the coldest winter in an instant. No one expected Meng Xinghe to be so straightforward. He didn't say any dignified words, nor did he use his identity as the Xinghe Martial Arts Academy or the Guzun's lineage to suppress others. The cause and effect was that simple. Chu Xiu killed Yi Weikong, so he wanted to kill Chu Xiu. Chapter 1365. Meng Xinghe's reason was very simple, so simple that no one could refute it. You killed my good friend, so I'm going to kill you. What's there to refute? Before Chu Xiu could say anything, Fang Baidu stepped forward and said in a deep voice, Dean Meng, aren't you being a little unreasonable by saying that? As the leader of Guzun's bloodline and the dean of the Galaxy Martial Arts Academy, you have to follow the rules and reason when you do things. Yi Weikong took the initiative to seek cooperation with the sword sect of the world, and he was also the one who wanted to kill Cult Master Chu first. If he's not strong enough and gets killed instead, then he deserves it. Why does it sound like Cult Master Chu deserves to die? Fang Baidu had just surrendered to Chu Xiu, and he had been tricked and forced to surrender. Of course, he would not be so loyal to Chu Xiu. Now that he stood up for Chu Xiu, he was actually doing it for himself. Since he was already standing on Chu Xiu's side, there was no longer any room for him to turn back. Both sides had the same interests, so Chu Xiu could not die, and the Kunlun devil cult could not be destroyed. Meng Xinghe nodded and said, You're right. Yi Weikong was courting death. He was too stubborn, and he couldn't suppress the anger in his heart. He was like this in the past, and he's still like this now. But so what? I'm not the leader of Guzun's bloodline, nor am I the dean of the Galaxy Martial Arts Academy. I'm just a martial artist who wants to avenge his brother. Fang Baidu, you've been a Guzun for too long, and I'm afraid you've forgotten what the underworld is like. Gratitude and grudges, right and wrong, in this mortal world, no one could escape. I don't care about right or wrong today. I only care about what I should do and what I shouldn't do. Fang Baidu wanted to say something, but he was stopped by Chu Xiu. There was a smile on Chu Xiu's face as he said calmly, Dean Meng is right. It's rare for it to be exactly the same as what I thought. It's not so easy to distinguish right from wrong. I've always thought so. Chu Xiu's words were not hypocritical, but Meng Xinghe's thoughts were surprisingly identical to his own. If Lu Fengxian and the others were killed in the future, even if they were in the wrong, why would Chu Xiu care? World of martial arts was never a place where right and wrong could be distinguished. But Principal Meng, there is no right or wrong in the Jianghu, but there are gains and losses. Yi Weikong is dead, but you are still alive. The Starry River Martial Institution still exists. Are you sure you want to act today? You think you can kill me just by attacking? Meng Xinghe didn't say anything, but in the next moment, the red sandalwood sword in his hand had already been unsheathed. The blade of the sword was pitch black and was dotted with specks of starlight. It was a clear day, but it had drawn down a dazzling river of stars. Su Tianya and Feng Baidu's expressions changed, and they cursed inwardly. They felt that they had been extremely unlucky during this period of time. When they were hanging around with the World Sword Sect, they were planted by Chu Xiu as a spy, and they were set up to turn the tables around. They had been tricked badly by Meng Xinghe. Now that they were under Chu Xiu's protection and had a disciple, they could follow the Kunlun devil cult to dominate the East region. They didn't expect that Meng Xinghe, the supreme expert of the ninth heaven, would come to them again. However, at this moment, Feng Baidu felt that something was wrong. Chu Xiu was too calm. Although Chu Xiu gave people the impression that he was a cunning old fox, scheming and far-sighted, as if everything was under his control. However, people like Wei Shiya and the others were equally calm, as if they didn't take Meng Xinghe, a peak expert of the ninth heaven, seriously. Either they were short-sighted, and they thought that the peak experts of the ninth heaven were only slightly stronger than those of the eighth heaven, and weren't that strong. Or, Chu Xiu already had someone to rely on, so they weren't afraid. Chu Xiu let out a deep sigh and said, "Revenge breeds revenge. When will there be an end to it? Old senior, I'm counting on you this time." Feng Baidu and Su Tianya were stunned. Senior? Which senior? Could it be Chu Xiu's master? Before they could react, a powerful wave of energy suddenly came from the interior of the Kunlun devil cult. It was a desolate and magnificent aura, like that of the prehistoric times. As the aura spread, even the earth was trembling. A tall old man in a Taoist robe walked out step by step. His powerful strength, which looked like that of a devil, gave people a very uncomfortable feeling when compared with the Taoist robe embroidered with cloud patterns on his body. Seeing the old man in a Taoist robe, Meng Xinghe's hand, which was holding the sword, paused for a moment before he spat out 3 words. "Old barbarian king?" The old man in a Taoist robe who appeared in front of everyone was the old barbarian king of the Luoshan tribe. After Chu Xiu resolved the attack of the southern region, the first thing he did was not to organize the Eastern Region Alliance meeting, but to personally go to the southern barbarian land and invite the old barbarian king. Meng Xinghe and Yi Weikong hadn't seen each other for hundreds of years. In the eyes of others, the two of them had taken different paths and had completely parted ways. However, Chu Xiu had a feeling that Meng Xinghe wouldn't let this matter go so easily. But Yi Weikong wanted to kill him, so he naturally wouldn't let him go. Moreover, the situation at that time didn't allow him to show mercy. So, after the incident, Chu Xiu naturally had to find a way to guard against Meng Xinghe. The old barbarian king was a very good choice. Since they were allies, you couldn't just stand by and watch when an ally was in trouble, right? Of course, the old barbarian king wouldn't be used by Chu Xiu for nothing. He took the opportunity to blackmail Chu Xiu with a few excessive conditions. At least in the eyes of the Daluotian human experts, these conditions were quite excessive. However, Chu Xiu readily agreed to it in exchange for the old barbarian king's help. Looking at Meng Xinghe, the old barbarian king grinned and said, "I didn't expect you to recognize me. I haven't dealt with you, but I've dealt with your master, the previous Xinghe loose cultivator. At that time, I was still a Taoist priest in the spiritual treasure temple, and your master hadn't accepted you yet. The descendants of your lineage are very extraordinary, and so is your master. Your eyes should be on the galaxy above the 9 heavens, and not on the disputes of the mortal world. You can't touch this kid as long as I'm here." Meng Xinghe was very curious about how Chu Xiu managed to invite the old barbarian king. However, Meng Xinghe just shook his head and said, "My Tao heart isn't stable yet. How can I pursue the great way if I don't sever the karma of the mortal world?" The old barbarian king shook his head and sighed. Stubborn. This old man hasn't fought for a long time. Now is the right time to exercise my muscles and bones. My race isn't like your human race. We don't like respecting the old and loving the young. This old man doesn't feel any pressure when dealing with the juniors." The old barbarian king's voice faded. His figure moved and went straight towards Meng Xinghe. Suddenly, a loud explosion resounded between heaven and earth. No one could see the figure of the old barbarian king. It seemed as if he had crossed through time and space. When he appeared in front of Meng Xinghe, his fist had already fallen. The fist shatters the world. Chu Xiu felt the law of power pulsating the moment the old barbarian king attacked. The old barbarian king had casually thrown a punch. However, the law of power triggered by that punch was even stronger than that of Chu Xiu's law embodiment of heaven and earth. None of the peak powerhouses of the 9 heavens was a simple existence. Or, it could be said that there was a disparity between the 9 heavens. Although Luo Shan of the World Sword Sect was also a 9 heavens expert, he was only superior to an 8 heavens expert in terms of power. He didn't crush them in terms of control over the power of law. And at this moment, the old barbarian king and Meng Xinghe controlled the law of power that had completely surpassed the scope of Chu Xiu's understanding. They were already so strong, let alone existences on the level of Dao Paragon. Of course, strictly speaking, Dugu Weiwei and Ning Xuanji were also 9 heavens martial immortals. Although they were excessively strong, they hadn't broken through to the next realm. Therefore, they were still considered as 9 heavens experts. Therefore, the waters of the 9 heavens were very deep. At this moment, Meng Xinghe's clothes fluttered while facing the old barbarian king's punch. His figure remained motionless. However, it seemed as if he had crossed countless spaces. He instantly retreated more than 10 feet. He lightly slashed the star-rune sword in his hand forward. Instantly, a river of stars fell from the 9 heavens. The enormous power collided with the river of stars. The might that erupted almost destroyed the entire central square of the Kunlun devil cult. The next moment, the star-rune sword in Meng Xinghe's hand danced. He looked like an immortal descending from the heavens. Sword light fell, and a river of stars fell from the sky. Every starlight was a sword intent. Tens of thousands of starlights fell, and astonishingly, the old barbarian king was wrapped within them. The old barbarian king was stunned for a moment. Then he burst into laughter and said, "You are stronger than your master. Your sword is also sharper than master's." However, his voice had barely faded when countless rays of light from the spiritual treasures behind the old barbarian king soared into the sky. Moreover, the multicolored rays of light were extremely dazzling. Any existence that came into contact with those rays of light would be assimilated and melted away. Its might was incomparably overbearing. At this moment, the experts of the spiritual treasure temple wouldn't dare to believe that the old barbarian king had cultivated the rays of light to such a degree. Ordinary disciples of the spiritual treasure temple would cultivate rays of light one after another. 36 rays would be considered as a small accomplishment, and 108 rays would be considered as a master. Only an existence of martial immortal realm would be able to cultivate more than 1,000 rays of light. However, the old barbarian king's rays of light were densely packed. There were tens of thousands of them. Meng Xinghe slightly wrinkled his brows. He withdrew his sword and swung the horsetail whisk in his hand. The horsetail whisk contained 10,000 rays of starlight. It extended for thousands of feet, and went straight towards the old barbarian king. The power of the starlight drawn by the horsetail whisk was capable of freezing the power of laws. It directly imprisoned the old barbarian king on the spot. The star-rune sword rippled as it pierced through space and time, and went straight towards the old barbarian king. However, Meng Xinghe suddenly frowned when the sword pierced through the old barbarian king's protective aura, and pierced his chest. A pitch-black scale emerged from the wound on his robe. It made his sword unable to advance even an inch further. The old barbarian king grinned and said, "Don't forget that this old man isn't from your human race. I've practiced many cultivation techniques of your human race. However, I haven't forgotten the special skill of my race." The old barbarian king's body issued a wild beast-like roar after he said this. His formidable power broke free from the binding of the starlight, and even tore apart Meng Xinghe's horsetail whisk. Chapter 1366. Old Barbarian King wasn't an expert of the human race. Meng Xinghe was actually at a disadvantage when he fought with him because he had never encountered such an opponent. Xinghe Lu's cultivator's lineage was very strong. Their cultivation techniques, sword techniques, and all kinds of secret magical abilities were emerging one after another. However, there was nothing they could do in the face of an extreme existence like old barbarian king. Even if Meng Xinghe had frozen the power of laws around his opponent, old barbarian king was still able to break free by relying on his own strength. This was somewhat unreasonable. Meng Xinghe withdrew his sword and didn't continue to attack. Instead, he looked at Chu Xiu and lightly said, "Old barbarian king can protect you for a while, but he can't protect you forever." Chu Xiu also had an indifferent look on his face as he said, "I only need to protect you for a while. I'll be your opponent at that time." Starlight flowed in Meng Xinghe's eyes as he looked deeply at Chu Xiu for a moment, and then his figure flashed. In the blink of an eye, he'd already left on Starlight. He'd left in an extremely straightforward manner, and it was just as sudden as when he'd arrived. Chu Xiu also narrowed his eyes. No one knew what he was thinking. Chu Xiu hadn't felt what kind of person Meng Xinghe was before, but now he could feel it. This was a very scary person. In his eyes, there was only the result, and no process. Yi Weikong was dead, and he wanted to kill Chu Xiu. Therefore, he had come here without any hesitation. He found out that old barbarian king was here, and he couldn't kill Chu Xiu. So he had left without saying a word. This wasn't a person who could be swayed by emotions. However, such an existence was the most terrifying. Everyone present only reacted after Meng Xinghe had left. They couldn't figure out what Chu Xiu was doing. Did he join hands with the barbarian race? Everyone was shocked. However, Chu Xiu had already shown signs of this during the founding ceremony of the Kunlun Devil cult. Therefore, they didn't panic too much when old barbarian king personally made his move. Chu Xiu cupped his hands at the crowd and said, "It was just an accident just now. Everyone, don't panic. The Great Eastern Alliance has been officially established. Next, there will be disciples of my Kunlun Devil cult stationed in your sects, as well as setting up a formation. When the time comes, I hope that Master will cooperate with us." Chu Xiu cupped his hands in obeisance towards the old barbarian king after sending away all the people present on the scene, and said, "Many thanks to old barbarian king for his help." Old barbarian king shook his head and said, "It's nothing. You and I are allies, and you have paid such a big price. So I should help you." The price mentioned by the old barbarian king was that Chu Xiu had promised him to build a martial courtyard in the Luoshan tribe. Then he would let the disciples of the Kunlun Devil cult teach the barbarian disciples from an early age. In fact, the old barbarian king already had this idea. For example, Xiao Wu, who had participated in the founding ceremony with Long Shan, was trained by the old barbarian king through the method of training human experts. However, this method of training consumed too much energy. The old barbarian king could only train 1 or 2 people. After all, he was the patriarch of the Luoshan tribe. So it was impossible for him to give up his cultivation and management of the tribe to become a teacher and train disciples. Therefore, he had asked Chu Xiu to build a martial courtyard in the Luoshan tribe. He wanted Chu Xiu to bring the true martial arts inheritance to the barbarian race. This was already a very excessive thing in the old barbarian king's opinion. But he didn't expect that Chu Xiu would agree so easily. The old barbarian king felt that he had taken advantage of Meng Xinghe this time. He had only exchanged a few moves with Meng Xinghe, and the opposite party had already retreated. Therefore, the old barbarian king thought for a moment and said, "Little friend, as long as you are in the southern barbarian land, I will be able to detect Meng Xinghe's attack. Moreover, I will be able to stop him in time. However, I wouldn't be able to help you if you were in the hinterland of the eastern region, or if you were to run to the other regions. Moreover, don't think that I'm stronger than Meng Xinghe just because I've repelled him once. It's still unknown who would win, and who would lose in a real fight between the two of us. After all, the experts who would step into the 9th heavens after 500 years are not easy to deal with." Chu Xiu's heart moved when he heard the old barbarian king mention 500 years ago. He suddenly asked, "What does it have to do with 500 years ago?" Old barbarian king chuckled and said, "At your level, you should know about the war 500 years ago. It was a calamity for the martial artists of the great overarching heavens. The entire great overarching heavens was almost overturned by a single person. The Daoyuotian Ninth Heavens experts of 500 years ago were more than the present. However, their strength wasn't as strong as the present experts of the Ninth Heavens. The reason is very simple. At that time, they thought that they had reached the peak as long as they stepped into the threshold of the Ninth Heavens. It wasn't until that person appeared that they realized that they were still far from the peak. So, even after 500 years, this group of Ninth Heavens cultivators didn't give up on the path to the peak even after reaching the Tao Master realm. Every step closer to the peak is a step stronger. Do you know how far away those Ninth Heavens cultivators are from the peak? Chu Xiu nodded thoughtfully. He remembered that he still had to make arrangements for the existence sealed in High Heaven sect. So, after bidding farewell to the old barbarian king, he planned to retreat and break through to the fourth heavenly layer first. However, he suddenly changed his mind and decided to go to High Heaven sect first. However, just a few days later, another wave of commotion was set off in the martial world. Meng Xinghe had gone to find trouble with Chu Xiu because of Yi Weikong's death. This was already big enough. The dean of the Star River Martial Courtyard, the leader of Gu Zun's faction, had almost never made a move after becoming famous. So when he made a move at this time, it naturally attracted the attention of the entire Daoyuotian tribe. Of course, what attracted their attention even more was the old barbarian king's move. Although the current barbarian race was nothing to worry about, the old barbarian king's move still told these Daoyuotian tribe cultivators that the barbarian race still couldn't be underestimated. And Chu Xiu, as the leader of a major human race sect, had actually joined forces with the barbarian race. No one knew what kind of promise he had made, but it also caused the entire Daoyuotian tribe to curse him. In particular, the Southern Territory martial world cursed him even more fiercely. They had just suffered a loss at the hands of Chu Xiu. Even many forces in the Eastern Territory martial world were quite dissatisfied with Chu Xiu's blatant collusion with the barbarian race. But these things didn't matter to Chu Xiu. He had been cursed even more when he was in the lower realm, so he had long become immune to it. Moreover, everyone was just cursing. No one dared to find trouble with Chu Xiu under the banner of eradicating the traitor. Now, in addition to being the sect master of the Kunlun devil cult, Chu Xiu should have another identity, and that was the master of the Eastern Territory martial world. Now, in the Eastern Territory martial world, Cold River City had been destroyed. Royal Sky Pavilion had suffered a huge blow, and had become a vassal of the Kunlun devil cult. High Heaven sect had been crippled, and only the Kunlun devil cult was left to reign supreme in the Eastern Territory. At this level, Chu Xiu was no longer someone who could be provoked by any Tom, Dick, or Harry. Chu Xiu didn't care about these disturbances in the outside world. He directly brought Grandmaster Yuanji and the others to High Heaven City. Of course, there was no High Heaven City now. Only ruins were in front of everyone. High Heaven sect hadn't had time to clean it up yet. Chu Xiu asked Qin Baiyuan. Old sect master, as far as I know, High Heaven sect has sealed that existence from 500 years ago. Previously, Sect Master Fong had already shattered his own flesh and soul to fight against the sword sect of the world. Have you never thought of letting that existence out and perishing together with him? Qin Baiyuan sighed and said, to be honest, we have really thought about it. None of us are such noble people. If you want to kill me, I can't let you have it easy. At worst, we will both perish together. But it's not that we don't want to do that, but that we can't. That existence from 500 years ago had originally chosen the Daoyuo Divine Palace, but the major sects still need to use that place for cultivation, so they couldn't bear to part with it. So they chose my High Heaven sect. But my High Heaven sect only provided the location. The sealing spirit array was laid down by gathering the power of all the Daoyuotian sects. It's not something we can break now. Chu Xiu nodded thoughtfully before suddenly asking, then what do we need to do to break the spirit array? Qin Baiyuan said, there are many ways, but they are also very difficult. The simplest way is to break the spirit array by force, but that would probably require a master at the level of a Dao master or an era master. Or we can find an array Dao grandmaster, who is proficient in all the spirit arrays of the top Daoyuotian sects. But such a person doesn't exist at all. Even the sect master of the Great Thousand Sect, Tao Qianming, can't do it. The last method is to use a divine object born between heaven and earth to cut off the power of principles and destroy the operation of the spirit array. Moreover, it must be complete. Only a part of my High Heaven sect's High Heaven Wuji seal is cut off and refined, so it definitely won't work. Chuxiu nodded and suddenly said, "Then can my Kunlun devil cult's rootless sacred fire work?" Qin Baiyuan thought about it for a moment and said, "It should work, but this is just speculation. After so many years, who would dare release that person?" Chuxiu nodded and said, "Indeed, if it is not a critical moment, that person can't be released. As such, I plan to arrange a rootless sacred fire spirit array around the sealed world. One is to use it for defense. Now that High Heaven Sect's spirit array has been destroyed, in case someone attacks High Heaven Sect again, everyone can rely on the rootless sacred fire spirit array to defend themselves. The second is to prevent a repeat of what happened before, when High Heaven Sect clearly held a powerful killing tool in their hands, but in the end, they couldn't even destroy themselves." After listening to this, Qin Baiyuan found that he had misjudged Chuxiu before. What did it mean to say that a friend in need was a friend indeed? This was it. Chuxiu had saved Fang Yinglong once, perhaps for his own benefit. But this time, even though High Heaven Sect had been badly damaged, Chuxiu still came to their rescue in time, saving High Heaven Sect from destruction. Now that Chuxiu was willing to help High Heaven Sect arrange a defensive spirit array, Qin Baiyuan was deeply moved by this kindness. Qin Baiyuan directly bowed to Chuxiu and said solemnly, "Cult Master Chu's great kindness, my High Heaven Sect cannot repay it. Now my High Heaven Sect is willing to merge with the Kunlun Devil cult like Imperial Sky Pavilion and become its vassal, as long as we can preserve our sect's heritage." Chapter 1367. An old fox like Qin Baiyuan, who had lived for hundreds of years, would not be moved so easily. However, now that their High Heaven Sect was on the verge of destruction, and Qin Baiyuan was on the verge of a mental breakdown, Chuxiu's repeated help touched him greatly. Chuxiu did not expect such an unexpected harvest. He quickly helped Qin Baiyuan up. "Old Sect Master, there's no need to be like this. Helping High Heaven Sect is helping myself. Right now, High Heaven Sect has too many trivial matters to deal with. Old Sect Master, please go ahead. I'll find someone to build the spirit array here." Qin Baiyuan sighed. "Then I'll have to trouble Cult Master Chu." After Qin Baiyuan left, Chuxiu looked at the secret realm where the heavenly soul was sealed. The peripheral spirit array here had been destroyed, and the surrounding buildings had also been destroyed. Only the core spirit array in the depths of the secret realm remained. Not to mention Qin Baiyuan's trust in him. Even if High Heaven Sect became enemies with Chuxiu, it would be very easy for Chuxiu to release the heavenly soul. However, Chuxiu did not want to do so. He still had a trace of vigilance against the heavenly soul. He had to believe what the other party said, but not completely. Chuxiu was used to having everything in his hands. Therefore, if he wanted to release the heavenly soul, he would have to wait for Chuxiu to reach the peak of the 9th heaven layer one day before he would consider it. Of course, if Chuxiu really encountered a life or death crisis, all the cards in his hands would be useless. Chuxiu might also release the heavenly soul to gamble. Whether he released it or not, it was best to have it in his hands. Only then would Chuxiu feel at ease. Chuxiu called Master Yuanji and Chao Shen over and asked the two, "How long will it take to draw the rootless sacred flame here from the Kunlun Devil cult in the upper realm?" Master Yuanji was shocked and hurriedly said, "Religion Master, the two sides are thousands of kilometers apart. Such a long distance requires hundreds of transit spirit arrays. The materials and spirit array masters needed." Chuxiu waved his hand and interrupted Master Yuanji's words. "I will give you the materials for the formation, and all the formation masters in the East Domain will be under your command. They will cooperate with you unconditionally no matter which sect or force is in the area where the transfer formation is set up. So now I just want to know, how long do you need to set up the formation for me?" Grandmaster Yuanji stretched out 5 fingers. 5 months. Seeing the dangerous look in Chuxiu's eyes, Grandmaster Yuanji quickly said, 3 months. It will only take 3 months. Chu Xiu extended 2 fingers. In 2 months, I will enter closed-door training to attempt to break through to the 4th heavenly layer martial immortal. When I come out, I hope to see that the spirit formation has been completed. Master Yuanji was a good person. He was capable and loyal, but sometimes he was a little too slippery. Sometimes if you don't force him, you won't know where his limit is. You won't be able to do it in 3 days. Sometimes if you don't force him, you won't know where his limit is. Chu Xiu did not care about Master Yuanji's bitter expression and went straight back into seclusion. Actually, Chu Xiu was already confident he could break through to the 4th heavenly layer martial immortal. However, there were too many things to deal with in the outside world. He had just finished setting up the Kunlun demon sect, and the southern region had already invaded. This caused Chu Xiu to not even have the time to go into seclusion. Although martial immortals were divided into 9 heavens, in Chu Xiu's opinion, they were roughly divided into 3 levels. From the 1st to the 3rd heavenly layer, it was purely about accumulating power. They were the kind that could be reached by just enduring. Thus, all martial immortals that appeared in the pugilistic world were basically at the 3rd heavenly layer. When it came to the 4th heavenly layer, it depended on one's control over the power of laws. Chu Xiu had already fought against martial immortals of this level many times. Furthermore, his control over the power of laws could be said to be a matter of course. Thus, breaking through to the 4th heavenly layer was not a difficult thing. Furthermore, as long as he passed this bottleneck, the 5th and 6th heavenly layers were only a matter of time. There were no major bottlenecks. Within the secret chamber, ripples appeared in the space around Chu Xiu. The rule force materialized into strands of silk that floated around his body. Among the power of laws were the power of laws, as well as laws formed by the power of yin and yang. However, regardless of which type of law it was, they all wound around his body and completely fused with it. A violent golden radiance flickered around Chu Xiu's body. Then, everything returned to normal. 4th heavenly layer martial immortal, achieved. From the 3rd heavenly layer to the 4th heavenly layer, although it was only an increase of 1 heavenly layer, the change it brought to Chu Xiu was much greater than when he first entered the 1st heavenly layer. The change was not a change in power, but a change in his control over the power of laws. Now Chu Xiu's own power was still about the same as when he was at the 3rd heavenly layer, but if he used the divine ability of heaven and earth again, not only would the power of the divine ability increase greatly, but the duration of the divine ability would also increase. The reason for this was that Chu Xiu's control over the power of laws had risen to another level. After coming out of seclusion, Chu Xiu calculated the time. It was longer than he had expected. He had used close to 3 months. During this time, Chu Xiu also went to High Heaven Sect to take a look at Grandmaster Yuanji. The spirit array really only took 2 months to complete under Chu Xiu's supervision. At the same time, over the past 2 months, High Heaven Sect had rebuilt the shattered High Heaven City. Although it could not be compared to the original High Heaven City, it was still better than the previous ruins. At this moment, Chu Xiu suddenly received a piece of news. The sect master of the Sword Sect, Sword Saint Luoshan, had fallen. The entire Sword Sect was in mourning as they held a funeral for Luoshan. Luoshan's death was normal in the eyes of others. After all, Luoshan was not young anymore. Moreover, the transparent heaven sword was a divine weapon from the lower realm, which conflicted with the Daluotian rules. The backlash of using the transparent heaven sword was also great. Originally, the Sword Sect could have concealed this news, but with the style of the Sword Sect, they were not willing to do so. The Sword Sect would rather risk losing the deterrent force of a 9th heavenly layer master than to delay Luoshan's funeral. One could imagine how strong Luoshan's prestige in the Sword Sect was. However, after learning this news, Qin Baiyuan's face was filled with joy. The Sword Sect wanted to destroy my High Heaven Sect, but now it's time for them to be buried with Sect Master and the others. Chu Xiu's expression suddenly changed when he saw Qin Baiyuan's slightly excited appearance. He said, "Old Sect Master, now that Luoshan is dead, there isn't a single expert in the entire Southern Territory who can control the situation. So, I'm going to order the entire Eastern Territory Alliance to counterattack the Southern Territory. What do you think?" Qin Baiyuan didn't expect Chu Xiu to be so bold, daring to have ideas about the southern territory at this time. He pondered for a moment before saying, "But my High Heaven sect has suffered some losses. If we attack the southern territory at this time, I'm afraid we won't be able to hold on. Moreover, Cult Master Chu, Meng Xinghe is keeping an eye on you now. If you leave the eastern territory at this time, won't it be dangerous?" Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes and said, "Don't worry, when I say counterattack the southern region, it doesn't mean that we have to take down the sword sects of the world. We just have to take down a portion of the sects of the southern region that are close to the southern barbaric land, and we can conveniently take down the sword sects of the world. This time, my Kunlun Devil cult will be the main attacker, so High Heaven sect won't suffer too much. As for Meng Xinghe, he won't take action for the time being." Qin Baiyuan was surprised. "Why?" "Because he isn't 100% sure he can kill me." Meng Xinghe and Chu Xiu were actually very similar in a certain way of doing things. For example, in the current situation, after Meng Xinghe suffered a setback, he would wait until he was at least 100% sure of killing Meng Xinghe the next time. Otherwise, he would never do anything useless. The old barbarian king's favor could still be used a few more times. Obviously, in the old barbarian king's view, Chu Xiu had suffered a loss last time. He had made such an excessive request and Chu Xiu had agreed, but in the end he had only made a few moves and Meng Xinghe had retreated without any effort. Obviously, he had taken advantage of the situation. This time, when Chu Xiu attacked the southern territory, although the old barbarian king would not be around, Chu Xiu was prepared to let Feng Baidu build a spirit array in Luoshan tribe. At a critical moment, he could use the shadow-shifting moon secret technique to teleport the old barbarian king over. Although it would take some time, Chu Xiu didn't believe that Meng Xinghe could kill him in one move. Although a ninth heavenly layer was strong, it was impossible to be strong to such an extent. Of course, it was also possible for Dugu Weiwei and Ning Xuanji to be at the ninth heavenly layer. After the discussion, Chu Xiu immediately organized the martial artists of the Eastern Territory Alliance to attack the Southern Territory. They could directly pass through the 100,000 mountains. The old barbarian king would open a back door for Chu Xiu. Chu Xiu's action was not the slightest bit concealed or obstructed. He was going to attack in an above-board manner. So what if you know? Can you stop him? However, just as Chu Xiu left the southern barbarian land, he was stopped by someone. To be precise, someone took the initiative to see Chu Xiu. This person was Yuan Kongqing of the Heavenly Devil Palace. Both parties had cooperated many times before, and Yuan Kongqing had indeed helped Chu Xiu a lot. So at this time, Chu Xiu stopped his people and invited Yuan Kongqing over. In the past, when Yuan Kongqing faced Chu Xiu, he could still talk with an equal status. But this time, seeing the martial immortals under Chu Xiu and the densely packed elite martial artists of the Eastern Territory Alliance, how would Yuan Kongqing dare to face Chu Xiu with the same attitude as before? Chu Xiu didn't show any abnormality. He laughed and said, "Palace Lord Yuan, long time no see. How have you been recently?" Yuan Kongqing smiled and said, "My Heavenly Devil Palace didn't get involved in any trouble. It's been good." Yuan Kongqing changed his tone and said, "Cult Master Chu, I really didn't know that the World Sword Sect attacked the Eastern Territory. The World Sword Sect brought all the sects of the Southern Territory, but not my Heavenly Devil Palace. Obviously, they are guarding against my Heavenly Devil Palace. So this time, my Heavenly Devil Palace is actually very helpless. It's too late to help. But the sects of the Southern Territory have failed to attack the Eastern Territory. Isn't it good for both sides to stop and recuperate? Cult Master Chu, why do you have to resort to weapons again and insist on having another great battle?" Chapter 1368. Yuan Kongqing supported Chu Xiu on behalf of the demonic palace because he wanted to find an ally outside the southern region without affecting his own interests. In the end, who would have thought that Chu Xiu's growth would be too fast? It was so fast that the eastern region could no longer accommodate him. Chu Xiu was attacking the southern region, but the demonic palace was also in the southern region. So this time Yuan Kongqing had to bite the bullet and come. Of course, he did not come to stop Chu Xiu. He just wanted to persuade Chu Xiu to stop. Chu Xiu knew what Yuan Kongqing was thinking. It was human nature. Chu Xiu smiled and said, "Palace Lord Yuan, you don't have to be so nervous. No matter what, you and I are allies. The world of great struggle has begun. Does it matter which region we belong to? Anyway, in the eyes of Chu Xiu, it is not important. To me, there are only enemies and friends. In this attack on the southern region, I will not touch any region where the demonic palace is located. And Palace Lord Yuan, your demonic palace can directly issue a notice that as long as any force chooses to join your demonic palace, they will be safe." Chu Xiu pointed to himself and said, "In the southern region, I will be the bad guy and you will be the good guy. In the process, how many forces your demonic palace can gather will depend on your ability." After hearing this, Yuan Kongqing's eyes suddenly showed a touch of joy. The Eastern Region Alliance's large-scale attack on the southern region had already caused panic. At this time, if the demonic palace had the ability to protect them, it was guaranteed that a large number of Jianghu forces would choose to join the demonic palace for protection. Thinking of the benefits, Yuan Kongqing did not care about the Eastern region or the Southern region. He directly cupped his hands and said, "In that case, I will not stand on ceremony. Cult Master Chu, rest assured that the demonic palace will always be an ally of the Kunlun devil cult, and will never turn its back on you." After Yuan Kongqing left, Feng Baidu, who had witnessed the whole process, could not help shaking his head slightly. He was really not suitable to be the leader of a sect. It was not because he was stupid. After all, how many martial immortals were stupid? It was because their way of thinking was very different from the leaders of big forces like Chu Xiu. If he had been in Chu Xiu's place just now, he would most likely have threatened the Heavenly Devil Palace forcefully not to meddle in other people's business, and the result would have been a rupture between the two sides. In the end, Chu Xiu didn't do anything. He used the forces of the southern region as a favor, and let the Heavenly Devil Palace leave happily. In reality, Chu Xiu had only moved his lips. The Heavenly Devil Palace belonged to the southern mountain range, and so did those sections. He, Chu Xiu, had done nothing but waste his saliva. Previously, the primordial ultimate god had said that after the passage between the upper and lower realms was opened, anyone who wanted to establish a sect could choose to go to the lower realm to do so. Not only did the sects not object to it, but they even supported it. Feng Baidu had been tempted at that time. However, after seeing how Chu Xiu managed the sect, and how he dealt with the relationship with the other sects, Feng Baidu immediately gave up on the idea. However, some of the other martial immortals from the primordial ultimate god's lineage were tempted by the suggestion. They only hoped that the sects they established would not be destroyed too quickly. After sending the people from the Heavenly Devil Palace away, Chu Xiu led the disciples of the entire Eastern Region Alliance toward the World Sword sect. Wherever they passed, those forces did not even have the intention to resist. They either surrendered or fled. However, most of them fled. Although Chu Xiu didn't care about the division between the Eastern region and the Southern region, those small forces cared. Chu Xiu didn't force too much on such forces. After all, they weren't his target. They approached the Heavenly Sword Peak of the World Sword sect. At that moment, the World Sword sect was in a state of despair. The cultivators of the World Sword sect had always been very arrogant. Because of Luoshan, a ninth heaven powerhouse, in the eyes of the cultivators of the World Sword sect, apart from the Taoist sects and Buddhist sects, they didn't care about anyone else in the Daluotian world. Although the failure to attack the eastern region was a great blow to them, Luoshan's death was an even greater blow to them. Mu Baishuang wore white mourning clothes and had a cold expression on his face. After Luoshan's death, he became the new sect master of the World Sword sect. Seeing this situation, Mu Baishuang said coldly, "Why are you all panicking? What kind of storms has the World Sword sect not weathered? Previously, we failed to take down the High Heaven sect and the Eastern region. Now Chu Xiu won't be able to take down the World Sword sect either." Iguatia said faintly, "But don't forget how many martial immortals Chu Xiu has under him. Chu Xiu, Chenqing Di Wei Shuya, Qin Baiyuan, Zhong Qiushui, Feng Baidu Su Tianya. A total of 7 martial immortals. What about us? The old and weak. Our injuries haven't healed yet. Shengju Yuan was disheartened and returned to his secret realm. Mu Shunxiao of the War God sect and Tao Qianming of the Great Thousand sect were scared out of their wits. They asked for help everywhere and even prepared to move their sections. How can we fight them with just the few of us? At this time, a blue longsword flickered with a glimmer of light. Let me do it. I don't have a physical body anymore. Let me fuse with the Through Heaven sword. Sect Master, you can control the Through Heaven sword and fight with Chu Xiao and the others. This blue longsword contained the soul of Sword Venerable Blue Sea, Mingjilan. His physical body had been destroyed by Chenqing Di, but he had cultivated a soul origin secret technique, so he could maintain the integrity of his soul. However, he hadn't decided whether to rebuild his physical body with a divine object or to take over someone else's body, so he temporarily placed his soul origin in his divine longsword. Mu Baishuang shook his head and said, "It won't work. The power of the Through Heaven sword is too strong. It is a part of the power of heaven and earth. In the past, the old sect master could fuse his soul origin into the Through Heaven sword, because he could prevent his soul origin from being corroded by the Through Heaven sword. However, you can't do it. If you fuse your soul origin into the Through Heaven sword, you will be completely assimilated by the sword spirit's power in less than 3 breaths of time. It will be meaningless. Don't think so much. Activate the sword formation and fight to the end." The mountain guarding formation of the world's sword sect was called a sword formation. That's right, it didn't have any other messy names. It was a sword formation, a formation that could unleash the power of the sword Dao to its peak. Outside the Through Heaven sword sect, Chu Xiao asked Feng Qishao, "You have been in the world's sword sect for so long. Do you know how to break the formation of the world's sword sect?" Feng Qishao rolled his eyes and said, "Do you think I'm the kind of person who knows how to break the formation?" He was obviously ignorant, but when Feng Qishao said it, there was a sense of pride in it. It was as if he didn't know how to be proud. However, at the next moment, Feng Qishao looked at the Through Heaven sword sect, and a conflicted expression appeared in his eyes. He said softly, "When the battle starts, I won't make a move. After all, the people from the world's sword sect have treated me quite well. Also, Luo Shan is already dead. The world's sword sect won't be a threat to you anymore. Do you really have to make a move?" Chu Xiao shook his head slightly. Feng Qishao wasn't a goody two-shoes. However, although he seemed unreliable, he was actually a person who valued relationships the most. If it was someone else, Chu Xiao would definitely be too lazy to explain to him. However, this person was Feng Qishao. Chu Xiao could only sigh and said, "You have been in the pugilistic world for so long. Haven't you seen it clearly? It's easier said than done if you want the world to be at peace. You feel that the world's sword sect is treating you well because you have talent and potential. That's why the world's sword sect is treating you well. There is hatred without reason in this world, but there is no love without reason. They treat you well only because you have value in return. If a down-and-out swordsman begged the world's sword sect, what would the world's sword sect do? They would chase him out like a dog. The world's sword sect had never been benevolent. Back in the lower realm, they had killed 90% of their disciples in order to survive. In the pugilistic world, there was no such thing as right or wrong. There was only what should be done and what shouldn't be done. The Eastern Territory never had the intention to attack the Southern Territory. They only wanted to defend their territory. However, the battle with the world's sword sect caused the Imperial Sky Pavilion to suffer heavy losses. 80% of the High Heaven sect's disciples died. Out of the 3 martial immortals, only one was left. Were they not innocent? Today, I attacked the world's sword sect because I want a day when no one dares to attack the Kunlun devil cult. No one dares to kill my brothers, my friends, and my fellow sect members." Chu Xiao's voice was slightly cold. Of course, the pugilistic world in reality was even colder than that. Feng Qishao laughed self-deprecatingly. "Brother Chu, I was naive. Perhaps the sect master was right. I am indeed not suitable to take over the position of Sword King City Lord." Chu Xiao shook his head and said, "You are not naive. This is just your heart. If you don't want to change, then don't change. It's too wasteful to use your talent in intrigue and killing. One day, When you can stand at the peak of Sword Tao, you will be able to control your own fate and the fate of others. Look at Brother Lu. He has always done well. He doesn't care about good or evil. He doesn't distinguish right or wrong. He only follows his heart. Perhaps in the eyes of outsiders, Brother Lu can't distinguish between good and evil. He doesn't know right from wrong. However, what right do outsiders have to impose their views on me? Hearing Chu Xiu mention him, Lu Fengxian tilted his head. Brother Chu, Brother Feng, did you call me? Chu Xiu shook his head and said, No, I'm just praising you. With such an interruption, Feng Qishao seemed to have thought it through. He smiled and said, Being sentimental really doesn't suit me. Since I'm following my heart, then you guys can make a move next. I'm a soft-hearted person. I can't bear to use weapons. There are a few young sisters and big sisters in the Imperial Sky Pavilion who are not bad. I'll go and have a heart-to-heart talk with them. Feng Qishao was still talking nonsense. In the next moment, the sword intent on the sky-piercing sword peak soared into the sky. As the sword formation of the Under Heaven Sword sect was activated, Chu Xiu only had one feeling at that moment. It was as though what was erected in front of him was not a mountain peak of the sect, but a huge sword that reached into the clouds. Many disciples of Under Heaven Sword sect were hidden in the formation, as they looked at the people below with vigilance. The corner of Chu Xiu's lips curled into a smile. He had unleashed the heavenly demon creation power to the extreme. Streams of demonic aura pierced through the void, stirring up the heaven and earth, and causing the weather to change. Chu Xiu's voice resonated in the clouds along with this power. Kunlun's Chu Xiu is here to pay a visit to the mountain. Chapter 1369. Chu Xiu's voice resounded throughout through the Heaven Sword Peak. His powerful demonic chi roared like thunder, causing the towering through the Heaven Sword Peak to tremble slightly. The cultivators of the sword sect turned pale. Mu Baishuang's voice came from above. Chu Xiu, if you want to attack the sword sect of the world, it should be High Heaven sect. Your Kunlun devil cult clearly suffered the least losses in this battle, yet you're attacking my sect under the banner of revenge. How ridiculous! Chu Xiu said lightly. My Kunlun devil cult suffered the least losses because my Kunlun devil cult has the strength to do so. If I had come a little late back then, after your sword sect of the world destroyed High Heaven sect, what awaited me would have been the encirclement of your sword sect of the world, right? Mu Baishuang, I won't say any more high-sounding words. Since ancient times, the winner takes all. I only ask you one question. Your sword sect of the world, will you surrender or not? Mu Baishuang didn't even think about it and said directly, The sword sect of the world has never surrendered. We won't surrender in the past, and we won't surrender in the future. Chu Xiu praised. A swordsman would rather break than bend. You really have backbone. However, if the sword sect of the world doesn't surrender today, there won't be a future. Chu Xiu's expression changed instantly and he shouted, Kill! Break the formation. Following Chu Xiu's order, a total of 7 martial immortal realm powerhouses, including himself, surrounded the sword sect of the world's spirit array and began to attack it. The sword array of the world's sword sect had taken the entire sword sect of the world 10,000 years to set up. Who knew how many layers of spirit arrays there were? Normally, the fastest way to break a spirit array like this was to break it with force. No matter how many layers of spirit arrays there were, they would all be smashed. It was the same when the sword sect of the world attacked High Heaven sect previously. 80% of High Heaven sect's spirit arrays were smashed by the Through Heaven sword. At that moment, although Chu Xiu's side did not have a killing weapon on the level of the Through Heaven sword, with the 7 martial immortals joining hands, they were still able to shake the sword formation of the entire sword sect of the world. Surging sword chi wrapped around the sky-piercing sword. It was the purest form of sword intent. Although it lacked some changes, any attack that landed on the sword formation would be destroyed by the pure sword intent. Even the power of rules would be the same. Chu Xiu shouted in a low voice. Focus on one point. As soon as he said that, Chu Xiu's body swelled up in size in an instant. His demon deity body, which was thousands of zhang tall, appeared, and the great power brought about by the lawful embodiment of heaven and earth bombarded the Skirich sword with his punches. The pure power of his punches tore apart the sword beams. Wei Shuya condensed all the energy in his body and transformed it into a thread of rootless sacred flame. He attacked the array formation that had been destroyed. The power of the rootless sacred flame was the purest form of power of the heavens and earth. In the past, when Wei Shuya activated the rootless sacred flame, he was even able to temporarily trap Yi Weikong, who had reached the 8th heaven. Although he did not have the rootless sacred flame by his side now, he had only condensed a thread of energy. However, it was enough to cut a crack in the array formation. Feng Baidu formed a seal at the back. Boundless moonlight enveloped the surroundings of the crack, causing the sword qi in the other parts of the array formation to be unable to repair the crack. Chen Qingdi, Su Tianya, Qin Baiyuan, and Zhong Qiushui unleashed all their powers and started attacking the crack in the array formation. Under their powerful attacks, the crack finally expanded gradually. The surrounding array formation was also torn apart, letting out a series of explosions. Mu Baishuang frowned. Ignoring his injuries, he channeled all his power into the crack in the array formation. In an instant, countless sword beams appeared and slashed towards Chu Xiu in an overwhelming manner. However, Chu Xiu used the indestructible holy demon body on top of the lawful embodiment of heaven and earth, and used the simplest form of power to suppress Mu Baishuang's power. Mu Baishuang's face was filled with shock. He could sense that Chu Xiu had already reached the 4th heaven of the martial immortal realm. However, he had only risen by 1 heaven. Why was the difference in power so great? The sword beams were gradually suppressed. In the end, they were all shattered by Chu Xiu. Mu Baishuang suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. He could no longer maintain the operation of the array formation. Withdrawing the state of the lawful embodiment of heaven and earth, Chu Xiu had already condensed the apocalyptic flame on the formation breaking blade in his hand. He was prepared to completely destroy the array formation. He slashed out with the devouring blade. The powerful blade intent twisted the rules of heaven and earth, forming a huge black hole that slashed towards the crack in the array formation. Just as Mu Baishuang was about to burn his blood essence to repair the crack in the array formation, an erratic voice suddenly came from the air. Suppress. A Taoist seal that was floating in the air smashed down. With a loud boom, regardless of whether it was Chu Xiu's devouring blade or the attacks of the others, they were all shattered by that Taoist seal. Furthermore, that Taoist seal seemed to be made of white jade. It was even emitting a dense Taoist connotation, as it repaired the broken array formation of the world's sword sect. The crowd looked towards the sky and saw an old man wearing a purple Tai Chi Taoist robe. He held a horsetail whisk in his hand and descended on a majestic crane. He cupped his hands towards Chu Xiu and the others and said, "I am Zheng Tai of the Three Pristines Palace. My Taoist name is Qi Cheng. Greetings, Cult Master Chu." Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes. The old Taoist in front of him was not simple. His cultivation should be at the 8th heaven. Furthermore, he was different from Yi Weikong, who relied on becoming a demon to step into the 8th heaven. This old Taoist's aura was condensed to the extreme. His Taoist connotation was hidden, and he was unfathomable. He was much stronger than Yi Weikong. Of course, none of the Taoists from the Three Pristines Palace were weak. Chu Xiu cupped his hands and said, "Taoist priest Qi Cheng, our Kunlun devil cult has never had any enmity with the Three Pristines Palace. I wonder why Taoist priest Qi Cheng is stopping us now." Taoist priest Qi Cheng had a warm smile on his face as he said, "The Three Pristines Palace has no intention of becoming enemies with Cult Master Chu. However, the sealing array formation of the Daoyuo Divine Palace has begun to crack on a large scale. Dao Master is certain that the array formation will break within a month, and the upper and lower worlds will be connected. Therefore, at this time, Dao Master hopes that the entire Daoyu Ocean Kingdom can settle down, and there will be no more large-scale conflicts. In the West region, Dao Master has personally mediated the conflict between the World Lord and the Master of Sanskrit. In the South region, Cult Master Chu, please stop." Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, "Taoist priest Qi Cheng, I have already fought my way to the gates of the World Sword Sections. I am only one step away from completely taking down the World's Sword Sections. Even if you have the Three Pristines Palaces backing, Isn't it a little too much to interrupt me at this critical moment? Why do I feel that the Three Pristines Palace is specifically targeting me this time? Taoist priest Chi-Cheng shook his head and said, Cult Master Chu is wrong. The Three Pristines Palace has never targeted anyone, and there is no need to do so. It is all just a coincidence. Cult Master Chu has a great enmity with the master of the Star River Martial Arts Academy, Meng Xinghe. Cult Master Chu, do you know why Meng Xinghe did not make a move when you left the East region? It was the Tao Master who personally asked Meng Xinghe to stop temporarily. The Three Pristines Palace has always treated everyone equally. Cult Master Chu, you did not suffer any losses. Chu Xiu chuckled. I did not suffer any losses, but I did not gain any advantages either. However, if I had rejected the Three Pristines Palace's suggestion, I'm afraid that Taoist priest Chi-Cheng's Taoist seal would have smashed on my head, right? Taoist priest Chi-Cheng shook his head and said, Cult Master Chu, you must be joking. The Three Pristines Palace has always convinced people with virtue. Why would we do such a thing? Apart from the initial reason, Chu Xiu did not believe a single word that Taoist priest Chi-Cheng had said. Convinced people with virtue? There was no sect that convinced people with virtue in the pugilistic world. If there was, it would have been destroyed long ago. A moment later, Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, Since this matter was ordered by the Tao Master, I will give face to the Tao Master and the Three Pristines Palace. I will stop this time. However, I have brought so many people to the South region. I can't possibly return empty-handed, can I? As long as the Sword Sect agrees to give me something, I will retreat. Taoist priest Chi-Cheng immediately turned his gaze to Mu Baishuang and asked, Sect leader Mu, you have heard what Cult Master Chu said. Are you willing to agree to his condition? Mu Baishuang frowned slightly. He knew that Taoist priest Chi-Cheng was not on his side. The other party only needed the Daluotian people to be peaceful during this period. Therefore, Mu Baishuang could not refuse at all. However, he still asked, What does Chu Xiu want? Do I have to give him the Heavenly Sword Sect's Heavenly Sword too? Chu Xiu said indifferently, Don't worry. I don't want the Heavenly Sword Sect's Heavenly Sword. What I want is something useless to you. In the battle 500 years ago, the Sword Sect collected quite a lot of blood essence from that person, right? I don't want anything else. I only want the blood essence of that person 500 years ago. Other than Chu Xiu's desire to expand his territory in the southern barbaric land and revenge on the surface, Chu Xiu's main purpose for attacking the Sword Sect this time was actually Dugu Weiwei's blood essence. In the East region, the blood essence of the Imperial Sky Pavilion and High Heaven Sect had been plundered by him. In the southern region, the blood essence of the Devil Dao lineage was also in Chu Xiu's hands. The only one left who participated in the battle 500 years ago was the Sword Sect. The Sword Sect must have Dugu Weiwei's blood essence in their sect. To the current Chu Xiu, this thing was even more useful than the 9 Revolutions divine pill. After swallowing it, he could immediately digest it and his strength would increase tremendously. It could be said to be a must-have for home cultivation. Of course, only the current Chu Xiu could refine this thing. If anyone else tried to refine it, they would only be courting death. Actually, in this battle, Chu Xiu did not intend to attack the Sword Sect just like that. Although the Sword Sect was currently weak, they still had several trump cards. Therefore, the minimum requirement of Chu Xiu was to get Dugu Weiwei's blood essence. Taoist priest Chi-Cheng looked at Mu Baishuang and said with a slight smile on his face, Sect leader Mu, there is a price to pay. Don't lose the big for the small. Mu Baishuang sighed. The Three Pure Palace needed the stability of the Daluotian. In the eyes of Taoist priest Chi-Cheng, Chu Xiu's request was not excessive. If he forcefully refused to give it, Taoist priest Chi-Cheng might stand on his side. I'll give it to you. As he spoke, Mu Baishuang immediately sent someone to the treasure pavilion to dig out Dugu Weiwei's blood essence, and threw it to Chu Xiu. After receiving it, Chu Xiu cupped his fists at Taoist priest Chi-Cheng. Please send my regards to the sect leader. As long as no one comes to find trouble with me during this period, the East region will not take any action. Taoist priest Chi-Cheng smiled and nodded. Take care, Cult Master Chu. Chapter 1370. During his trip to the Eastern Domain, although the sword sect of the world was not destroyed, Chu Xiu had almost achieved what he wanted to achieve. Almost breaking through the sword sect of the world allowed High Heaven sect and Imperial Sky Pavilion to vent their anger and become even more loyal. At the same time, other cultivators who were reluctant to join the Eastern Domain Alliance before, after seeing the true strength of the Kunlun Devil cult, also submitted. At the very least, they no longer dared to make any overt actions. Of course, the most important thing was that Chu Xiu obtained Dugu Weiwei's blood essence. The amount of Dugu Weiwei's blood essence that the world's sword sect had collected was actually the most. But thinking about it, it was normal. After the sword sect of the world obtained this blood essence, they should not have wasted a single drop. The sword sect of the world were all swordsmen. There were too few cultivators who studied other miscellaneous daos, or rather none at all. So after obtaining Dugu Weiwei's blood essence, they felt that they could not refine it, so they stored it away. Refining Dugu Weiwei's blood essence was almost the best way for Chu Xiu to increase his strength at this stage. There were 9 heavenly layers of martial immortal, and each heavenly layer required a comprehension of the power of laws and the accumulation of power. Chu Xiu was very confident in his comprehension, and he was also very confident in his combat effectiveness. When fighting against martial immortals whose realms were far beyond his own, Chu Xiu was naturally able to comprehend the power of various laws. But there was no way to accumulate power. It could either rely on external objects or time. Chu Xiu was now at the 4th heavenly layer. In fact, his 1st and 2nd heavenly layers relied on the power of the Daoyuo Divine Palace. The 3rd heavenly layer relied on the power brought about by the collision of yin and yang sources, and the 4th heavenly layer relied on the accumulation of power. He comprehended laws in continuous battles, and did not need too much power to support him. Without these external objects, although Chu Xiu had the confidence to step into the next heavenly layer, he might need several years or even more than 10 years to accumulate strength. After successfully refining more than 20 drops of Dugu Weiwei's blood essence, although it did not allow Chu Xiu to directly cross over to the 1st layer, it had pushed his strength to the peak of the 4th layer. He only needed an opportunity, and with Chu Xiu's understanding of the power of rules, stepping into the 5th layer would not be a problem. This process was very fast. Chu Xiu only used a few days to complete it. However, when he came out, he saw Wei Shuya and the others waiting for him outside. Chu Xiu touched his nose and asked curiously, "Did something happen in the outside world?" Wei Shuya and the others said helplessly, "The 3 pristine temples said that the exalted divine palace's formation would collapse within a month. When the upper and lower realms are connected, what are we going to do? The Daoyu Ocean is a Kunlun devil cult, and the lower realm is a Kunlun devil cult. As long as one is not blind or deaf, they will know who we are. Haven't you thought about how to deal with it?" Wei Shuya had been worried about this all this time. After the upper and lower realms were connected, their identities could no longer be hidden. They thought of many ways, but found that there were too many loopholes. There was no way to hide it. When Chu Xiu heard this, he couldn't help but laugh. "So that's what you're worried about. Is it not worth worrying about?" Mei Qinglian said. Chu Xiu waved his hand. "I've been thinking about this since the day the Elysium was destroyed. We don't need to hide it, nor can we. Whether it's the Daoyu Ocean or the lower realm, I, Chu Xiu, am the master of the Kunlun devil cult, and now the master of the entire Eastern Territory. As long as you have the strength in your hands, the Daoyu Ocean sects will not care whether you are from the lower realm or the upper realm. In other words, if I, Chu Xiu, did not have the strength, the Kunlun devil cult would not have been able to establish a foothold in the Daoyu Ocean world, and it would have been destroyed long ago." When they heard Chu Xiu's words, they finally realized that they had gotten themselves into a dead end on this matter. The so-called Daoyu Ocean and the lower realm did not need to be clearly distinguished. As long as they had the strength, what was the difference between the Daoyu Ocean world and the lower realm? Chu Xiu quickly said, "But even so, my Kunlun devil cult has foundations in both the Daoyu Ocean world and the lower realm. When the time comes, there will inevitably be some friction, so we must be prepared for this. By the way, have the sky keys of High Heaven sect and Imperial Sky Pavilion been delivered? We should also follow the Daoyu Ocean world to the lower realm." Chu Xiu controlled the overlapping space between the two worlds, so he did not need a key. But this time, all the Daoyuotian cultivators needed to go through the Daoyuotian Divine Palace's spirit array to the lower realm. Chu Xiu did not want to expose the entrance to the overlapping space. Although as long as his identity was exposed, some people would definitely guess it, Chu Xiu still chose to go to the lower realm with the Daoyuotian sects. The Sky Key was the key to crossing between the upper and lower realms. This thing was actually not mysterious. It was a kind of rare treasure formed by the distortion of the space principles, and after being reinforced by a spirit array, it would become a Sky Key. Before the people from the lower realm came to the Daoyuotian world, they were in too much of a hurry due to the Great Ancient Tribulation, so they collected very few materials and refined even fewer Sky Keys, which led to most of them being left behind in the lower realm. After arriving in the Daoyuotian world, many sects learned from this painful experience and collected a lot of materials to refine Sky Keys. The Daoyuotian world was rich in resources, and although there were not many of these mineral veins, there was no shortage of them. Even if the Sky Keys were temporarily useless, the major sects kept them in their sects, so whether it was a large or a small Daoyuotian sect, or an ancient venerable, no one lacked these things. Chu Xiu naturally did not have these things, so he asked High Heaven Sect and Imperial Sky Pavilion for some. After arranging for some people to guard the Daoyuotian Kunlun Devil cult, Chu Xiu took Wei Shuya and the others, as well as Tangya and several dozen other elite cultivators, into the Daoyuotian Divine Palace to wait for the spirit array to shatter. At this time, there were already many sects waiting in front of the Daoyuotian Divine Palace. The most eye-catching were the people from the Dao sect of the Northern Territory and the Buddhist sect of the Western Territory. The Dao Master's entire figure was shrouded in a profound Dao accumulation, making it impossible to see his appearance. The appearance of the World Master was somewhat beyond Chu Xiu's expectations, almost like a wandering ascetic monk. If it were not for his imposing manner and the presence of Zen Master Jishan, Fa Jing, and the others accompanying him, Chu Xiu would not have believed that the person in front of him was the Heavenly Treasure Temple's World Master of this generation. As soon as Chu Xiu appeared, the Brahmin sect's hierarch turned to look at him. The pressure of a ninth heaven master had reached the point where it could distort the weather. Good and evil were two sides, but both eyes were staring at Chu Xiu with malice. The yin and yang forces in front of Chu Xiu were entangled and collided with each other. This was the power of creation, and it offset the pressure brought by the other party's gaze. The sect master's eyes flashed with astonishment, but before he could do anything, the world sovereign and the Dao sovereign turned to look at him at the same time. This immediately caused the sect master to retract his gaze and close his eyes to rest. After a while, many people from Gu Zun's lineage also arrived, led by Meng Xinghe. However, Meng Xinghe acted as if he did not see Chu Xiu and directly ignored him. The Dao Master had said that the Daoyuotian Devil cult must ensure stability before entering the lower worlds. Even if the old barbarian king was not here and Chu Xiu was right in front of him, Meng Xinghe would not act, because he knew that once he acted, the Dao Master would definitely stop him. He never did such a useless thing. Chu Xiu touched his chin. He suddenly realized that he seemed to have offended too many people. He had formed a death feud with two ninth heaven masters at the same time. It was estimated that there was no other person like him in the entire Daoyuotian Devil cult. As the time approached, more and more sects arrived, as well as some rogue cultivators. Basically, all the forces that were qualified to refine the heavenly key were here. But at this moment, the laws inside the exalted divine palace distorted, and an old Taoist dressed in a slightly sloppy outfit walked out. Seeing the old Taoist appear, the Dao accumulation around the Dao Master dissipated, revealing his true appearance. It was an old Taoist wearing a silver Taoist robe with cloud patterns. Although he was old, his appearance was square and elegant. He had 3 long strands of beard, and the Dao accumulation was flowing in his eyes. His every move seemed to be in harmony with the world and nature. It could be said that he had the charm of an immortal just by looking at his appearance. At the very least, he looked better than the sloppy old Taoist. But when Chu Xiu saw the old Taoist, his pupils immediately shrank. The old Taoist was actually Ning Xuanji. But Chu Xiu remembered that Ning Xuanji seemed to have said that he wanted to comprehend the power of the initial laws in the exalted divine palace, so he wouldn't return to the lower realm. Why did he appear again? At this time, the Tao Master bowed to Ning Xuanji and said, "Senior, you're here." These few words caused everyone present to be instantly horrified. Only the world's sovereign, the sect master of Sanskrit, and a few others knew of Ning Xuanji's existence and identity. As far as they were concerned, Tao Master was practically the #1 person in Daoyuo heaven. However, he had addressed the sloppy old Taoist as a senior and treated him with such respect. Who exactly was this old Taoist? At this moment, everyone present suddenly had a feeling. The waters of the Daoyu Ocean seemed to be very deep. They thought that they knew the Daoyu Ocean people very well, but in fact, they were far from qualified. Ning Xuanji casually waved his hand and said, "What do you mean I'm here? I'm going home. Have you forgotten where I came from?" The Tao Master chuckled and said, "Of course we haven't forgotten, Senior. Don't worry, we are also from the ancestral land. This time, you are going home, and so are we, not like the Daoyu Ocean who came 10,000 years ago. We are connected by blood and cultivation techniques. Since we're going home, of course we won't kill." Ning Xuanji looked at the Tao Master with a faint smile. "Daoist Xiantian, if I remember correctly, your Daoist name is Xiantian, right? You're much stronger than your master. He's an honest guy who has cultivated to the point of becoming a fool. You're stronger than him. There's no need to talk so much. You're going to the lower realm to find what you want, and I'm also going to find what I want. One is east, and the other is south. There's no conflict. As long as you don't go too far, this Tao Master can't be bothered to meddle in other people's business." The Tao Master nodded slightly and said, "Senior, you must be joking. My master has his Tao, and so do I. Our Tao is connected to the heavens, and there's no difference in strength. I will set the rules for the lower realm with them. We're of the same race, not those barbarians. No one dares to kill wantonly." Chapter 1371. Ning Xuanji's appearance here was a little out of Chu Xiu's expectations. Moreover, his relationship with the Daoyu Ocean was also worth pondering. Among the top powerhouses of the ninth heaven present, it seemed that only the Tao Master would communicate with him as an equal, and even dare to test him. Endless starlight flickered in Meng Xinghe's eyes. No one could see his expression, but Chu Xiu discovered that the moment Ning Xuanji appeared, he took half a step back. The bamboo hat on the world sovereign's head covered his face. Although it was impossible to see his expression, the world sovereign slightly lowered his head the moment Ning Xuanji appeared. As for the sect master of the Sanskrit sect, his reaction was even more obvious. The moment Ning Xuanji appeared, his body slightly tensed up. A complicated look appeared in his eyes. Clearly, he had dealt with Ning Xuanji before. Moreover, Ning Xuanji had left a bad impression on him. Ning Xuanji glanced at everyone present. He also saw Chu Xiu, but his gaze didn't linger on Chu Xiu for too long. "I've said it before, this Tao Master is just going home to take a look and pick up some things. As long as you don't go too far, I won't care. Why are you all so nervous? This Tao Master isn't going to eat you." While the two sides were talking, a violent tremor suddenly came from the exalted divine palace. The formation that sealed the passage between the two worlds began to shatter like an avalanche. The passage between the two worlds had already been completely opened. From the outside, one could even see the turbulent spatial storm. The Tao Master let out a long sigh and said in a deep voice, "Everyone, it's time to go home." With that, the Tao Master stepped into the passage with the sky-connecting key in hand. The others present glanced at each other before stepping into the passage one after another. Just as the Daoyu Ocean cultivators were preparing to enter the lower realm, more cultivators had gathered at the Heaven Gate in Kunlun. The Daoyu Ocean could feel the formation shattering, and it was naturally even more obvious in the lower realm. After plundering the Elysium Gate, Chu Xiu stayed there for a while to absorb the powerful energy pouring out of the exalted divine palace. However, as the rift grew larger, more and more primordial qi leaked out. The primordial qi between the upper and lower realms became balanced. The primordial chi in the heavenly gates was only slightly more than the outside world. It was not of much value, so Chu Xiu withdrew everyone. Seeing that the people from the Kunlun devil cult had left, the people from the other sects would not let go of this opportunity. They all sent people over to check, but they also discovered that the formation was broken. Thinking back to what Chu Xiu had told them before, there was another world behind this spirit array. Those martial artists from 10,000 years ago had gone to that world. What was the situation there? At this time, many warriors had gathered in front of the Gate of Heaven's ceiling array formation. People from the major sects in the Jianghu and even the royal families of the three countries had sent people over. Among them, the most eye-catching ones were the ones standing at the front, the martial immortals. Previously, everyone had thought that the Elysium realm was the peak. But as the primordial chi from the upper realm spread to the lower realm, the level of primordial chi in the entire world rose by a level. Those martial artists who had been stuck at a bottleneck discovered that their bottleneck had loosened. This was especially true for the top sects with legacies. Their breakthroughs were even more astonishing. The first to bear the brunt was Yi Xiaonan. As someone who could step into the second heavenly layer of martial immortal in the lower realm's primordial chi, even Chu Xiu had to admit that Yi Xiaonan was the true genius. Now that the primordial chi was abundant, Yi Xiaonan directly crossed 2 heavenly layers and reached the 4th heavenly layer. Because the old celestial master was old, he did not dare to make a breakthrough. But now, with his powerful primordial chi foundation, the old celestial master had stepped into the martial immortal realm. He had even reached the 3rd heavenly layer in one go. Apart from Yi Xiaonan and the old celestial master, there were 2 other people in the lower realm who had stepped into the martial immortal realm. One of them was the Ying family's ancestor. Among the profound understanding realm martial artists in the lower realm, the Ying family's ancestors' age and strength were among the top. He had also successfully broken through his bottleneck and stepped into the martial immortal realm. Moreover, he had quickly stabilized his cultivation and stepped into the 2nd heavenly layer. As for the last person, most people did not expect him to be Shen Baochen from the Sword Hut. Among the profound understanding realm martial artists in the lower realm, Shen Baochen was one of the younger ones. He was not even from the same era as the Ying family's ancestor. Although he was not weak, he was not as talented as Yi Xiaonan. But Shen Baochen had one advantage: he kept a low profile. He rarely appeared in the pugilistic world, and the Sword Hut rarely interfered with the affairs of the pugilistic world. But every time Shen Baochen appeared, his strength would increase slightly. He could be said to be a person who fought steadily and secluded himself like a madman. Under such circumstances, Shen Baochen had also stepped into the 1st heavenly layer of martial immortal not long ago. Originally, he had planned to enter seclusion to stabilize his cultivation. But because of such a major event, he could only give up on his seclusion and wait with the others for the unknown person from the upper realm to appear. The Ying family's ancestor frowned and said, "Where did Chu Xiu go? Where did the people from the Kunlun devil cult go? Why hasn't a single one of them come?" The old celestial master shook his head. "I don't know. I've sent people to the southern barbaric land to ask, but the disciples of the Kunlun devil cult refused to tell me. As for western Kunlun, it's completely empty. Only some low-level disciples were left behind to guard the place." The Ying family's ancestor glanced at Yi Xiaonan, but did not speak. He knew that Yi Xiaonan would not ask about Chu Xiu's whereabouts. Why has Chu Xiu been so mysterious all these years? Why hasn't he appeared for such a major event? As the number 1 sect in the pugilistic world, the Kunlun devil cult has gone too far. There was a hint of resentment and dissatisfaction in the Ying family's ancestor's tone. In the past, the Ying family's ancestor would not have dared to say this. But now that he had also stepped into the martial immortal realm, he felt that he was in the same realm as Chu Xiu. The Ying family's ancestor seemed to have become inflated, and he did not fear Chu Xiu as much anymore. At this moment, a cracking sound came from the ceiling formation. The runes of the formation exploded like an avalanche. The powerful aura immediately caused everyone present to retreat. After a while, just as everyone was about to go closer to see what was going on, a powerful aura came from within. Dao Master's figure was the first to walk out. When he saw Yi Xiaonan and the other cultivators from the lower realm, a look of astonishment appeared in his eyes. He had guessed that the lower realm cultivators would definitely sense the movement of the formation and come to investigate. But he did not expect that the strength of the cultivators from the lower realm would be so weak. Was this their original strength, or were they not all present? How did a world of this level produce peak powerhouses like Dugu Weiwei and Ning Xuanji? As Dao Master walked out, the Daoyuoshan cultivators walked out of the formation one after another. Feeling the powerful auras, the eyes of all the cultivators present, including Yi Xiaonan, were filled with shock. Before, they had also imagined how strong the Daoyuoshan cultivators were. Just like how Dao Master did not expect the lower realm to be so weak, they did not expect the Daoyuoshan cultivators to be this strong. There were dozens of people who had reached the martial immortal realm like them. The auras of Dao Master, World Master, and the others were especially powerful. They were like a towering mountain, so high that they could not see the end of it. At this moment, the Ying family's ancestor suddenly noticed something. He pointed at the Daoyuoshan cultivators with a horrified expression. Even his voice had changed. Chu Xiao. Cult Master Chu? Why are you over there? Hearing the Ying family's ancestors' words, the crowd finally reacted. Who else could it be but Chu Xiao following behind the Daoyuoshan cultivators? They could not have mistaken him for someone else, because Wei Shuya, Shang Tianliang, Chen Qingdi, and the other Kunlun devil cult cultivators were also following behind Chu Xiao. At this time, the Daoyuoshan cultivators also felt that something was wrong. Why would someone from the lower realm know Chu Xiao? The master of Sanskrit suddenly turned to Chu Xiao and asked in a low voice, "Who are you?" At this time, Chu Xiao could not hide it, nor did he intend to. He smiled and said, "Of course I am me. Who else could I be? I am Chu Xiao, the master of the Kunlun devil cult, Chu Xiao. I am the Kunlun devil cult of the lower realm, and also the Daoyuoshan Kunlun devil cult." At this moment, not only did the Ying family's ancestor and the others understand, but the Daoyuoshan cultivators also understood. No wonder they had always felt that Chu Xiao's existence was very uncomfortable. He was not a Daoyuoshan at all. But after understanding this, the emotions of both sides were different. The Ying family's ancestor and the others in the lower realm felt that they had been fooled. The excuses used to attack the heavenly gate were all prepared by Chu Xiao from the beginning. Moreover, they had been wondering why Chu Xiao's strength had improved so quickly. They could understand why Chu Xiao was strong. After all, the master of the devil cult was a genius. But the people under Chu Xiao's command had also improved so quickly. This was simply unreasonable. Could it be that as long as they followed Chu Xiao, their talent and potential could change? Only now did they know that all of this was because of the Daoyuoshan cultivators. What bullsh***. We agreed to cultivate together, but you secretly cheated. Of course, because of their strength, the Ying family's ancestor and the others were not too angry. They just felt sullen. But the Daoyuoshan sects, especially those who had fought with Chu Xiao, were really angry. They felt that they had been fooled. Chu Xiao had brought the power of his subordinates into the Daoyuoshan and created such a top force out of thin air. This was simply stealing the luck of the Daoyuoshan people. Previously, the World Sword Sect did not understand why Chu Xiao could find a sword genius like Fang Qishao to join the World Sword Sect as a spy. Now it seemed that Fang Qishao was a martial artist from the lower realm. No wonder they could not find any information about Fang Qishao. Although both the upper and lower realms had been fooled by Chu Xiao, it was obvious that the Daoyuoshan people were even more furious. The master of Sanskrit shouted, "How dare you deceive the whole Daoyuoshan people, Chu Xiao?" Chapter 1372. Attitude stemmed from strength. Chu Xiao's behavior in the lower realm only made the Ying family old ancestor and the others feel aggrieved, but not too angry. In any case, the Kunlun devil cult had grown to this extent, and they were no match for Chu Xiao. So what was the use of being angry? However, the Daoyuoshan cultivators all looked at Chu Xiao with hostility, and even the people from High Heaven Sect and Imperial Sky Pavilion who had joined Chu Xiao felt a little awkward. Chu Xiao said lightly, You think I'm deceiving the Dao Ocean? The Tao Venerable said before that the Dao Ocean and the lower realm are of the same origin. Since we are all on the same side, how could I deceive them? I have the Kunlun devil cult in the lower realm, but I also have the Kunlun devil cult in the Dao Ocean. I, Chu Xiao, am just a simple Chu Xiao, and the Kunlun devil cult is also a simple Kunlun devil cult. How could there be any difference between the Dao Ocean and the lower realm? Could it be that you all came to the lower realm just to go through the motions and have no intention of establishing your own sect? Although Chu Xiao's argument was sophistry, it was still quite reasonable. The Dao Ocean sects had spent time and energy to come to the lower realm to establish their forces there. Whether it was for resources or for people, it was all for their own benefit. In this way, they must also have forces in both the Dao Ocean and the lower realm. So what was the difference between them and the Kunlun devil cult? Perhaps the essential difference was Chu Xiao himself. However, the Brahma religion's religion master was obviously not interested in listening to Chu Xiao's sophistry. He looked at the Tao Venerable and said coldly, "You said before that the Dao Ocean people should settle down before descending to the lower realm, and I listened to you. But now that we're in the lower realm, are you still going to stop me if I want to kill you?" The Tao Venerable did not speak. He had no enmity with Chu Xiao, nor did he have any karma with him. Therefore, he had no reason to harm Chu Xiao, but he also had no reason to save him. The Dao Ocean people all turned to look at Chu Xiao. Everyone knew that Meng Xinghe had come to find trouble with him. At that time, Meng Xinghe was repelled by Chu Xiao's old barbarian king. However, the old barbarian king wasn't here this time. So what could Chu Xiao use to block? At this moment, Chu Xiao calmly took out an array plate and said lightly, "This array plate of mine is connected to High Heaven Sect's spirit cloud stage." Everyone present was stunned. So what if Chu Xiao's array discs are connected to the divine cloud realm? Even if you're connected to the exalted divine palace, the Brahmin sect's sect master will still kill you if he has to. However, the Tao master, the world exalt, and the master of Fan sect's expressions changed slightly. Chu Xiao sneered. "You've guessed it. You've all seen my Kunlun devil cult's rootless sacred flame. After taking over High Heaven sect, the first thing I did was connect the rootless sacred flame spirit array to the spirit cloud realm. That's a genuine divine object of heaven and earth. It can definitely break the spirit array in the spirit cloud realm and release that existence. I destroyed the Vishnu temple and killed your Brahmin sect's people. But so what? If you want to kill me, then we'll all perish together. You've sealed that existence for 500 years. Guess who among you will be able to escape if he comes out?" Chu Xiao had a malicious smile on his face, looking like he was saying, "Come on, let's fight." That despicable look made the Brahmin sect leader gnash his teeth in anger. Most of the people present were dumbfounded because they didn't know what that existence was. But the Brahmin sect master and the others knew. In fact, it was their ancestors who had sealed Dugu Weiwei, so they naturally knew how strong Dugu Weiwei was and what the consequences would be if he was released. Qin Baiyuan looked at Chu Xiao with a complicated expression. It turned out that this was the reason why Chu Xiao had been so active in setting up a spirit array in High Heaven sect. Although Chu Xiao's actions were using High Heaven sect, Qin Baiyuan didn't resent Chu Xiao. High Heaven sect had fallen to the extent that it needed the protection of the Kunlun devil cult, so what right did it have to resent others? Qin Baiyuan just felt a little sad. High Heaven sect clearly had such a powerful weapon in their hands, but they had never thought of using it for so many years. Why was that? Because of arrogance and conceit. In High Heaven sect's view, they were already strong enough, so there was no need to threaten others in such an undignified way. As a result, when High Heaven sect encountered a real crisis, they didn't use their trump card and instead used it by Chu Xiao to threaten a ninth heavenly layer master. Moreover, this move was really effective. The evil side of the sect leader's face was still flickering with ferocious killing intent, but the good side of the sect leader's face was twitching and muttering something, as if he was trying to persuade himself. Finally, the Tao master quickly said, "Forget it, we're all humans. The Dao Ocean and the lower realms should be treated equally. Don't forget, we didn't come to the lower realms to resolve these grievances. Let's hurry up and find that thing." Hearing the Tao master's words, The Brahmin sect's religion master turned his head and resisted the urge to continue attacking. But at this moment, in the lower realms, Lu Chonglu looked at the Daluotian crowd and called out hesitantly, "Ancestral Master?" Ning Xuanji was standing in the crowd, but let alone the cultivators from the lower realms, even Lu Chonglu didn't recognize him for a while. After all, they were not people from 500 years ago. Although the portrait of Ning Xuanji had been passed down in the true martial arts sect, the Ning Xuanji in the portrait had a sage-like demeanor. He looked like a master who had achieved the Tao, not as sloppy as he was now. The other people in the lower realms all turned their eyes to Ning Xuanji, and the shock on their faces grew even stronger. It was even more intense than when they found out that Chu Xiu had already gone to the Daluotian. Who else could Lu Chonglu call ancestral master? Only the legendary existence, the immortal Ning Xuanji. But why did the Ning Xuanji in front of them seem different from the Ning Xuanji they had imagined? Ning Xuanji raised his eyebrows, walked out, and asked, "Are you a disciple of the true martial sect?" Lu Chonglu nodded and bowed to Ning Xuanji. After bowing respectfully, he said, "This unfilial disciple, Lu Chonglu, greets ancestral master. I'm now the 72nd sect master of the true martial sect." Ning Xuanji glanced at Lu Chonglu and said calmly, "You're really unfilial. You're actually so weak. You're not even a martial immortal." Lu Chonglu's face immediately turned red. If someone else said that, he would definitely spit on that person's face. Although he wasn't strong, even if he couldn't be ranked in the top 10 of the pugilistic world, he could still be in the top 20. Moreover, the true martial sect was the state religion of Eastern Qi, and he was also the state preceptor of Eastern Qi. However, the person who said that was his ancestral master, so he could only accept it. "Who's your master?" Ning Xuanji suddenly asked. Lu Chonglu said, "My master is Sage Puxuan Zhang Taixian." Ning Xuanji shook his head. "I've never heard of him. Where's your master's master?" "Sage Qingyan Tao Gongdu." Ning Xuanji still shook his head. "I still haven't heard of him. He might not even be a direct disciple 500 years ago. Forget it. It seems like my disciples and grand-disciples aren't very good. They didn't even leave behind their inheritance." Lu Chonglu immediately said, "Ancestral master, now that you're back, I'll immediately give up the position of the sect leader. After you take over the true martial sect, the true martial sect will definitely be stronger than 500 years ago." Ning Xuanji said calmly, "You can continue to be the sect leader. I won't get involved. My fate with the true martial sect will only last for one lifetime. The true martial sect is the true martial sect, but things have changed. It's no longer my true martial sect. Therefore, you can decide how the true martial sect will develop from now on. I won't interfere. However, this group of people will probably not destroy the real martial arts sect for my sake. Of course, you can also be arrogant and say some harsh words or something. However, if you're beaten as long as you're not killed, I definitely won't bother. So, you guys can think about it yourself." Even in front of his own sect, Ning Xuanji had a nonchalant attitude. Moreover, he addressed himself as Old Dao. No matter how one looked at him, he didn't look like the legendary martial Dao immortal. Could Lu Chonglu have mistaken him for someone else? In fact, Lu Chonglu was also dumbfounded at this moment. He hoped that he was mistaken. Although he had heard the other elders of the true martial sect discussing Ning Xuanji's character, he only knew it when he saw Ning Xuanji today. Rumors really couldn't be trusted. Ning Xuanji's character was even worse than the rumors. Ning Xuanji retreated as if nothing had happened. At this moment, the Dao master shook his head gently and stood up to the martial artists in the lower realm. He said softly, "Everyone, don't be nervous. You and I were a family 10,000 years ago. This used to be our ancestral land." The Daluotian martial artists came to the lower realm with the intention of communicating the two realms and spreading martial arts. At the same time, they also wanted to find what we had lost. We didn't come to kill, but to bring a flourishing age of martial arts, far surpassing the flourishing age of martial arts 10,000 years ago. Hearing the Dao master's words, the expressions of the martial artists in the lower realm eased a little. They weren't as nervous as before. They could see that the Dao Master was definitely the strongest among the top Daoyuotian martial artists. What he said was absolutely true. However, Chu Xiu sneered in his heart. He dared to say that even the Dao Master himself didn't believe what he said. The lower realm wasn't the Daoyuotian of the past. The martial artists in the lower realm weren't the barbarians in the upper realm. Moreover, with Ning Xuanji around, the Daoyuotian martial artists wouldn't dare to kill wantonly. Moreover, it wasn't necessary. However, if the Daoyuotian martial artists wanted to establish a force in the lower realm, there would definitely be conflicts. It was absolutely impossible to expect everyone to be good to each other. Just when the Dao Master wanted to say something more, the space between the two groups of people suddenly distorted. It was as if the rules of space had been disturbed. In the end, the space was torn apart, and Zhong Xinxiu's figure strode out. Looking at the surrounding environment and people, Zhong Xinxiu muttered as if there was no one around. The direction is correct this time, but it seems to be a little late. After speaking, Zhong Xinxiu looked at the Dao Master and the others. He shook his head gently and said, "Although the cause and effect has been messed up, I know that this isn't a place you should come to. You're tuning in to the Echoes of the Heart YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories."